wanting to give you a structure of how I will do my briefing today, I'm going to talk about the virus and what it's doing, and therefore what we're seeing in terms of disease around the world. And I'll try to be as explicit as I can about what's happening. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the variants that are keeping on coming. And then I want to look at vaccines and the different approaches on vaccines that we're seeing. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about responses and the way in which societies everywhere are responding to the pandemic. And finally, I'm going to give a bit of a global picture, because I think that the sort of global response remains extremely important. I've just had quite a lengthy session with Tedros and the other special envoys of the WHO during the lunch hour here in this part of Switzerland. So I can also give you a little bit of a feeling that's come from not just Tedros himself, but from four of the other envoys. And I hope that will give you a composite picture. Let's start with a general feeling about how things are going. We're into March 2021. We've already had 2 months of 2021 to reflect on. And I was asked as the new year started by several people, what's 2021 going to be like? Is that going to be when the pandemic nicely subsides and comes to an end and we'll be able to get on with life as we knew it would be? And what we say about these briefings is that we're trying to offer really unvarnished reflections of the pandemic and how it's reacting when humans encounter it. And I have to say that 2021 is already proving to be much tougher than 2020. Listening to the other envoys talking about what they're seeing around the world, the position that all of them said was, this is a really tricky and difficult time to be trying to interpret what's happening with COVID. And each one of the envoys said, even looking at the epidemiology leaves us with a number of quite complex issues to identify and work through. I think perhaps the most important starting point is to remind everybody what I have to keep saying to myself, which is that most of our planning for pandemics over the years has been planning based on influenza, because most of the pandemics that we have known about really in the last century have been pandemics due to the influenza virus. But a coronavirus pandemic is different. Coronavirus is droplet borne primarily. Coronaviruses themselves are really remarkably stable. They seem not to fade away in the way that flu viruses do, but instead they just stick around and in fact they mutate. And in their mutations, there's an evolutionary advantage to those versions of the virus that spread more easily. And so we've got to understand, I think, all of us, that if anybody says to us, oh, well, the pandemic is subsiding and the virus is going away and we're all going to get back to living as normal, at least as far as I'm concerned, that particular analysis just doesn't wash. That yes, we've got to get used to the reality that this virus is here to stay and that we've got to learn how to deal with it. So first of all, some language. I say that this virus tends to appear in spikes, quite localized spikes of infection that come in relatively tight geographical areas. And it moves from one area to another through people with the virus moving around. So if you want to stop the virus from moving, the easiest way to do it is to restrict movement. That doesn't get rid of the virus, but at least it stops it from spreading. So you've got spikes and you can keep it as spikes if you restrict movement around where you discover a spike. But then if the spike gets out of control, as we say, it turns from being a cluster of transmission that's appeared suddenly into quite a surge of infections. Much more difficult because you've got more and more people infected. And then suddenly on the map, you've got an area that turns red because you've got a high incidence in that area. And then as the surge builds up more and more, then we actually tend to see, because of movements around it, a swirling increase in levels and then an explosion of more and more cases, and then hospitals fill up, health workers get ill, and we get a major situation on our hands. So when you've got spikes turning into surges and surges then turning into explosive outbreaks, what do you see? Well, you see suddenly a large amount of people being sick and dying in a relatively localized area. When you look at the overall picture around the world, in the last 2 months, as I've said in previous briefings, the numbers were dropping, and they were dropping quite nicely. But in the last month or so, we've started to see an uptick again in reported cases in many parts of the world. In Europe, the cases are coming up. In the US, the cases are coming up. And in Latin America, coming up. In parts of Africa, coming up again. Even in India, in 6 states, there are numbers rising again. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the opportunities for people to be in contact with each other are increasing, and that's leading to more cases. And when a period of lockdown or movement restriction is coming to an end and people start moving around, you get a fairly quick upsurge in cases all over again. Now, where lockdowns are being used as the primary means of control, you get a good drop. But then when the lockdown is released, you definitely get an uptick again. So if lockdown is being used and it's a part of national policy in order to get control, there will be a seesaw effect. The lockdown is there tightly, cases drop, then the pressure builds up to release the lockdown and to let movement start again, and then cases come up again. And it becomes this seesaw between lockdown and release. Cases down, cases up. And that seesaw effect is in much of Western Europe right now. And my point to everybody is that it's got to be possible for humanity to be able to deal with this virus without the seesaws having to be used and without the consequences of the seesaws all the time being there. Just imagine you're trying to run a business and you're trying to plan for the future, and you have to build into your planning the possibility that within the next month or so, there's going to be a cessation of movement. There's going to be a requirement that people work from home, or at least don't go to their normal place of employment. There's going to be the possibility that movements are going to be restricted in part of your country. It makes it very hard indeed for you to run the business. Imagine you're a poor person living in the informal economy, and you've just come out of a period of lockdown. You're thinking, good, we're going to be able to get enough money to get back and get things for our families, getting clothes for our children and the like. And then you then have to anticipate that it's going to come back again, that lockdown's going to be in place in 6 weeks' time. And that's a really difficult situation to be in. It's very demoralizing. So I'm urging everybody everywhere to just start to find a way to plan to deal with this pandemic and live with this pandemic without all the time having to seesaw between lockdown and release. Because I just don't think it's good for humanity, and I don't think it's good for economies, for employment, and for people's livelihoods, for children's education, and a whole variety of other issues. And this has become quite an obsession of mine. People come up to me and say, so you're against lockdown? So I say, no. I just say that lockdowns should be the last resort. They should not be seen as a primary control measure, and that we need to be cleverer than relying on lockdowns. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute, because I want to be clear in a short time after I've just gone through variants and vaccines. I want to be back again and clear on the basics of what I understand to be the way in which humanity will be able to live with this virus for the foreseeable future. And I want us all to be really comfortable that the prescription that I'm offering, which is based on what WHO has learned over the last year, I want to be sure that that prescription makes good sense to all of you. And as I've said before in similar briefings, it's what I'm going to use as the basis for my work in the media, and also my advisory work with governments and with others who've got concerns about what to do. So a little bit now about variants and what we're seeing in relation to variants. Whenever you've got a virus that is multiplying, particularly a virus that's as widely spread as this new virus nCoV-2, the new coronavirus that's causing the pandemic, you will always get mutations. And some of those mutations, not many, but some, will lead to variants that can have greater transmissibility, possibly a different form of pathogenicity, and perhaps a different immune response, which then means that they may well, these new viruses, not be susceptible to the vaccine, to the protection that is induced either by the original virus or by vaccines that have been developed against the original virus. And that's what's concerning everybody around the world, that there will be variants emerging that can escape from the protection induced by the different vaccines. We never quite know, honestly, from tests that are done in laboratories, whether or not a particular variant will or will not be neutralized by the antibodies produced through a particular vaccine or by other forms of immunity that are produced by the vaccine. And so there's a lot of talk right now as new variants emerge about whether or not people who've been vaccinated with the currently available vaccines or whether or not people who've had the original coronavirus will indeed be protected by immune systems against the new variants. And I think it's fair to say that some of these variants are strong enough and have sufficiently transformed their structure so that they can evade the immune system and evade the immunity that's come from the original virus. Perhaps the place where this seems to be most prevalent is in Brazil, where new findings suggest that there are variants emerging which can infect people who've already had the original coronavirus. They seem not to be able to protect against the new variants in some cases with sufficient energy. So you're getting people who are having a second coronavirus illness due to variants because their existing immune response can't deal with these new variants. I think this is just something we have to expect to happen. It'll happen from time to time. It won't be everywhere. And we'll see a lot about it in the newspapers. It will lead to people saying that they're concerned about the new variants. My basic line is expect variants to emerge that will prove to be capable of breaking through the immune defenses that are in existence after people have had the original coronavirus. Expect variants to emerge that are capable of breaking through the immunity that people have got through some of the vaccines that are currently being used. This is going to be the shape of things to come for the foreseeable future. And that means, it means a very high degree of alertness, very skillful capacity to be able to examine the variants and identify whether or not they have got significant mutations. And it will mean over time that the vaccines that we've got have to be updated so that they can deal with the variants as effectively as possible. But trying to make sure that everybody in the world can be vaccinated with up-to-date vaccines as new variants emerge is going to be enormously difficult, especially given that we have shortages of vaccines right now, and we're struggling to get vaccines even in small amounts to poor countries, despite the extraordinary efforts of the people running the global vaccine program, or COVAX. There are a lot of details right now that need, I think, to be at least basically understood about COVAX and what COVAX represents and why COVAX is a great scheme, but also why it's quite a delicate scheme. Now, the COVAX system was established by the World Health Organization and other bodies after an agreement at the World Health Assembly in May 2020. And it's a scheme that's designed to offer vaccines to all nations at negotiated prices, carefully established negotiations leading to advance purchase orders for vaccines, even before those vaccines have gone through clinical trials. So there's a sort of pipeline of orders for vaccines, and it's awaiting the results of the trials, particularly the phase 3 trials, and awaiting emergency use licenses and good manufacturing practice certificates for the manufacturing plants. And when those certificates are given and the licensing is given as well by the World Health Organization, COVAX has the capacity to deliver the vaccines around the world. And COVAX has started working. Over the last 2 weeks, vaccines have gone, I believe, to 10 different countries, and they'll go on going, and countries will start their vaccinations, and it will be leading to, I think, big shifts. And already There are several African countries that have started vaccination programs. That's great news. But COVAX can only work if the manufacturers get their vaccines to the COVAX scheme so that COVAX can distribute the vaccines around the world. Now, manufacturers are finding that they are not able to keep up with their expected delivery dates. There are various reasons for this. One is that demand is fast outstripping supply. Second is that occasionally when a vaccine manufacturer is making vaccines, that you get bad batches and they have to be thrown away. And that does happen from time to time. That's what tends to occur when you hear, for example, that company X has got a problem in manufacturing facility Y. They've got a bad batch, millions of doses just have to be chucked down the drain. But there's a third reason why COVAX sometimes can't get the vaccines it needs. And that's because pressure, often political pressure within countries, is leading to national leaders going to the pharmaceutical companies saying, we desperately need vaccine quickly. And then the pharmaceutical companies, inevitably perhaps, when they're offered more money for their vaccines, will prioritize certain orders, perhaps new orders, over older orders that were made some time ago, because the new orders offer considerably more cash per vaccine dose. And that then means that a company will give priority to direct vaccine orders from countries over the orders that have been placed through COVAX some time ago. It's very difficult to know whether this kind of queue jumping is happening. One relies on anecdotal reports, and I personally don't want to say that there is widespread queue jumping, but the truth is that I'm hearing from multiple sources that many national leaders, because of public pressure, perceive that it is in their interest to do direct approaches to companies to try to negotiate advanced deliveries of vaccines so they can get moving. Now, the situation in some countries is more complex than that, because they might be starting vaccination programs with perhaps 2 or even 3 different types of vaccines, some of which have got their emergency use licenses, some of which have not yet got their emergency use licenses because they haven't even successfully been through their phase 3 trials, but they're still being used, and perhaps used under special licenses offered by national governments for experimental purposes. But just imagine the situation. You have 3 different vaccines being offered to people in a country, and each of those vaccines has slightly different patterns of protection. What then happens if variants come along and they're capable of breaking through the protection offered by one vaccine, but not by the protection offered by 2 others? But it will be very, very difficult if you don't know extremely clearly which vaccines are being given to which people and which batches of the vaccines have actually been used. Because the capacity of the variant to break through will not just depend on which vaccine, but may well even depend on which vaccine batch is used. So that will mean that in the coming weeks and months, there will be some quite tricky issues to resolve as the variants emerge. I call it a dynamic mosaic. And what I'm suggesting is that all countries need to be extremely cautious about tracking where they're using their vaccines, tracking what happens to people who are vaccinated, seeing whether or not they get infections, and then following up on them. One of the things that Tedros is being very clear on, he's the Director General of the World Health Organization, is that unless there is a much greater attention to vaccine equity, to the distribution of vaccines around the world in ways that respond to need, then there will also be the buildup of 3 particular problems. One is that we will get a situation where there's a lot more virus and a lot more illness in certain parts of the world where there's no vaccination going on, and then there will be other parts of the world that are well protected. And that will create a big imbalance in the capacity of people to move around, especially if there is the introduction of vaccine certificates, and these vaccine certificates are used to determine whether or not people can cross borders. We have a situation just now, for example, where we read in the press, and I don't know whether it's true, I'm checking it out, that Saudi Arabia has said that people coming to Mecca for the Hajj pilgrimage later this year will only be allowed to enter Saudi Arabia if they've got valid vaccine certificates. Well, what that's going to do is to increase the already noted increase in the sale and offering of fraudulent vaccines to people. Interpol, I understand, has already seized a number of batches of fake vaccines that are being offered. And you can imagine that if countries start asking for vaccine certificates for travel, and particularly if it's something that is in high demand, like traveling to Mecca for the annual pilgrimage, that will lead to the likelihood, and I'm only going to say likelihood, of more counterfeit vaccines being on offer, and then more duping of people who believe they're getting a real vaccine, but are actually getting something that's useless. So I'm going to be very clear on this. It's not the time to be using vaccine certificates as license for travel or license to cross borders, especially given the very limited amount of vaccination that's underway, particularly in poor countries. Otherwise, the reliance on vaccine certificates will actually stimulate the production of fraudulent vaccines and the sale of fraudulent vaccines, which I personally believe is an extremely unfortunate situation. I'd like to just end on the vaccine part by saying I would like to do everything possible in my powers to really put pressure on all nations to do everything that they possibly can do to make sure that the COVAX scheme succeeds. And if they don't do that, then that will further compound the inequity that I've just described. There's a really strong public health reason for going for vaccine equity. I've already suggested that if we don't do that, there will be almost certainly a buildup of virus and disease in some parts of the world, affecting people who are most exposed, like health workers. I heard today that more than 15,000 health workers have died as a result of COVID. I suspect the number is nearer 20,000 or 25,000. That is a terribly high toll. And that means that I shall, along with others, and I'm obviously Tedros and the WHO are strongly onto this, I shall advocate for the limited vaccines that are available to be prioritized for those who are most exposed and most at risk, particularly health workers, and I shall continue to focus on that. Now, in a situation where we've still got a lot of virus moving around, where the pandemic is on an uptick in many parts of different regions in the world, we've got to go back to basics. What are the elements of a response that really matter? Number one, the virus is the adversary and people are the response. They're the primary response to dealing with this virus. So let's remember that, and let's not stigmatize anybody in relation to this virus. We're all in it together. And people's responses need to be built around the things that we know that work. Physical distancing, 2 meters, mask wearing, but wearing proper masks that are well fitting, good hygiene, hand washing, surface cleaning, coughing into your elbow, and all those similar things. And then making sure that when people are ill, they isolate immediately without waiting for their test results. And the isolation is good and complete. And if isolation is not good and complete, let's put in place the necessary supports to make it happen. And let's protect the people who are most vulnerable. And the best way to protect them is to shield them. And a good way to shield them is with a vaccine. And that's what vaccines should be used for right now, is protecting those who are vulnerable and most at risk. Vaccines should not be used right now to try to drive down the pandemic. It's not clear that that's going to work, at least not really very effectively. There are lots of questions about it. And it seems to me to be a wrong use of the scarce vaccine that we have right now. It should be used to protect those who are most at risk. So putting people at the center, making sure that people are empowered to do what they can to hold the virus at bay is absolutely critical. And then to support people, it's community health services, community-based health services, what we sometimes refer to as public health, but I want to add the community word in because I think it's healthcare at the community level, making sure that groups of people know who's looking after their health, where they can get help. The honeycomb of community level healthcare is absolutely key. We keep forgetting about that. When we look at lockdown exit plans from countries in Western Europe, very rarely is the importance of community health services with their focus on identifying people with disease and isolating them, tracing their contacts and isolating them, doesn't get adequate mention. That may be something we've got to give more attention to, especially local level community health services, properly organized with good coming together in an integrated way of people who are trying to deal with the virus and help protect people. Lastly, I want to stress that treatment services remain key. But there are still people getting really sick as a result of COVID. And we've got to do everything possible to prevent them from getting really ill, from needing intensive care, because all over the world we have stories of where there are hotspots of COVID, oxygen is running out. You know, there's a very tricky area at the border between Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, right in the Amazon basin, where there is evidence of really serious illness and hospitals full to the brim, oxygen running out. Ditto in Sao Paulo state in Brazil, ditto in some parts of Africa, and certainly also in some parts of Asia as well. We've got to be focusing on the fact that treatment services need to be given all the support they can, because that's what people depend on to survive. And if health services are just not able to work, that's a problem. We've also got situations increasingly of reports where health workers are being attacked because there is often a shortage of supplies to treat people, and the relatives are turning on health workers physically, and that we've got to do everything possible to protect. So the treatment services in places where there are these acute hotspots need special attention from governments and from everybody else who can provide support. Lastly, I just am going to continue to be speaking out about this together with the other envoys of WHO and working with the Director General of WHO. We will start doing a series of public statements about what we believe has to be put in place for the foreseeable future to help humanity deal with this virus. It will be vaccination, yes, but vaccination in a very systematic and well-planned way with a global plan, as well as continued attention to public health measures, because without that, this virus is going to continue to cause major trouble. So that's my brief introduction, and it's really is reflecting what I've been able to learn, particularly in the past week, and now very, very happy to pass back to Twee for the middle part of our presentation, and then we will have a discussion session. Twee, please.
Thank you, David. And if you've got any last minute questions for us, please pop them in the chat so we can bring those together for part 2 of our session today. So as I promised, an intermission quiz as usual. Here we are. We have 3 questions that should have popped up on your screen. First question, what is the name of the tiny creature that is responsible for sleeping sickness or African trypanosomiasis, a disease endemic to sub-Saharan Africa? Is it the sandfly, mosquito, or tsetse fly? Question 2. According to the WHO mask guidance, there are 3 variables for achieving optimal performance: fit, breathability, and what else? Is it comfort, filtration, or biodegradability? And then lastly, last week I did promise something fitness related, because you all said that one of the toughest things to keep up over the past year was exercise. So we will do one stretch today, and you can choose which one that is. So I'm waiting for your answers to come through. I'm just going to spotlight our beautiful image from Joshua Knowles. Joshua, how was this first session? Which element here have you enjoyed during the most so far?
Well, hi everybody. I'm just at the moment trying to draw a rogues gallery. All of these things that have come up in the discussion around counterfeit vaccines, counterfeit certification, and increasing variants of the COVID seem to lend themselves to a kind of a wanted poster style image, which I'm working on in the middle here. I'm just writing in now, a rogues gallery.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh. We'll come back and see how you get on with that at the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so back to our quiz. Let's see what the answers are. So for question 1, the answer is indeed the tsetse fly, which most of you got right. For question 2, filtration, indeed. So that trifecta of fit, breathability, and filtration. Good to point out, though, one element that's really important to remember and is included in the WHO special focus this week in the epidemiological update is comfort, because you may have that trifecta to make that mask work really well, but if it's not, you need to make sure that it's comfortable so people do choose to wear them. And then lastly, which stretch shall we do today? The standing side bend. Okay, so it does mean, everyone, please do stand up and put your arms in the air. And I will do this with you. So stand up, arms in the air, and then lean to the left. Good stretch, you should feel that down your side. And then back to the middle, and then lean to the right. Stretch, 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 stretch. Back to the middle, and we are done. What I will do after the session, or I'll put the link in the chat now, is there's a great website done by the World Health Organization European part, with some tips and tricks for you there to keep this going. But there are many things that are really easy to do, really quick to do, particularly if you're at your desk all day. So don't forget to keep up that exercise. Thank you so much. Over to you, David.
Thank you. Super big welcome to many of you. I just want to acknowledge one or two. If I don't mention you by name, please don't think that I'm being rude or anything. It's just there are people who've been writing to me and whose emails I regret I've not necessarily responded to. I've got a bit of a deluge at the moment, which is hard to handle. So in a way, I can thank you here. Chaim, thank you for your emails. They are getting through, and I will use the weekend to reply. Georgina, it's lovely to see you again. Henk, thank you for joining. And many of you know that it's Henk is somebody I've worked with since SARS in 2003. Sarah, thank you for joining. NK, lovely to see you again. I'm sorry the numbers are creeping up again in different parts of India. We should, I think, be recognizing that this is to be expected, but the part that is most intriguing me is what is driving these increases, where they're occurring. Is it back in the cities again, in densely crowded urban areas, or is it coming from particular institutions? So in some parts of the world, it's places like prisons or barracks of military and so on that seem to be places where the virus gets stuck in and causing trouble. Gawaha, welcome. Nice to see you. Everybody, you know that Catherine Deland is my public health advisor, and very glad that you're here, Catherine. Thank you for communicating with me right through the thing. When you hear pings, it's my messages coming from Catherine. Hello, Marianne. I'm delighted that we'll be taking part in the event with Economic Commission for Europe. Looking forward to it. Joe Nichols, welcome. Look, Joe, I'm getting all these reports from real problems in Somalia. You kindly sent me a text saying that you were also seeing this and this was taking up a lot of your time. Hello to Zara. And also I got stories from Kenya too. I mean, the reality is there are hotspots all over East Africa cropping up, and this is taxing to the authorities and very concerning to people everywhere. Magan, thank you for joining from Botswana. I hope all is well there. And Farhan, good to see you again. Very pleased that Louisa Nofke is with us. Thank you very much indeed. Chris Langton too. Jean-Luc Poncelet and I worked together on a number of issues. He was head of emergencies in the Pan American Health Organization. And then we worked together in Haiti. Jean-Luc, lovely to see you here. And members of my family, welcome to all of you. Wonderful, we'll connect at the end. Now, let's just look at some of the issues that have come up in the conversation. So I'd like to go quite quickly to Scott Knox. If you'd like to just talk about this and tell us what my remarks have prompted in you, that will give us a chance to get a bit of clarification.
Yeah, so thank you, David. It's not just your remarks actually that have prompted this. It's been two presentations, two sessions within Canada that I've been involved with over the past couple of weeks. The first was, there's probably one of the most amazing strategic planners who works in our industry in Canada, has carried out this huge piece of research going back 700 years, looking at the human response to pandemics. The sad thing that I have to report is that we are doing now exactly as we behaved during the plague of 700 years ago. We are behaving now as we did through SARS. We are behaving now as we did through HIV/AIDS in the 80s. human behavior is a constant. And it's because of that, that yesterday I attended a roundtable with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So the heads of all of the associations representing all of the economic parts of the Canadian economy. And I actually got quite angry during the session because I interjected by saying, we are talking about tinkering at the edges of this goddamn problem when we have not in Canada, nor most countries, got the basics in place. Our track and trace is appalling. Our isolation mechanics are appalling. Our vaccine rollout is appalling. Our ability to communicate with our population is appalling. And I did that in part because I'm going to tell you something secret here. You may remember over the sort of the holiday season, I actually went a bit radio silent on these groups. That's because I was attempting to, and I was probably hours away from, bringing the entirety of the creative industries of Canada together to create a campaign around positivity on vaccination and creating a tribal club around it that was going to be a blueprint our industry was going to put across the world via the other associations for our industry. Unfortunately, and I'm probably going to get fired for saying this now, unfortunately, the Canadian federal government's procurement department got in the way and stopped the whole thing because existing contracts, and the whole plan collapsed. And I was so angry, but focus, Scott. So here's my issue. We are in a situation where we know that human behavior has been the same for 700 years around pandemics, should we believe that presentation. And it was a very compelling argument. You, David, and other members of the WHO team have been saying exactly the same thing for 12 months now about what we need to get as the basics. COVID readiness is a phrase you've used. We've had umpteen iterations of this, but the same has been. Now, the reason for my question is because of what you said earlier, combined with what we know about human behavior, combined with what we know about business sectors deciding, and I'm sure Canada's not alone, business sectors are now discussing taxation issues, what we're going to do around the economy, what we're going to do play with this. Nobody is focused on get the goddamn basics done or this is a future failure situation, which is why I asked the question, because it seems to me if we are accepting it, maybe humanity just needs to accept, and it needs to be a harder driven line. COVID is here and it's here forever. Stop thinking about it as influenza. Governments and or health organizations, stop telling your populations that the vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel, because it isn't. We need to be, as a society, globally thinking of COVID as the replacement of the common cold, but obviously is much more damaging. At which point, if that's the narrative, why isn't it that we play into the world? Because that re-evaluates people's thinking, to stop relying on, once I'm vaccinated, whoa, party! It stops people thinking like that and gets people back to, this is a reality, this is the world, how do we manage it? And to focus then on getting the basics right that you've been talking about for 12 months now, and focuses people on, I need to stop thinking there's a one fix thing. Like we think about diets. Oh, there's going to be a pill soon and I'm going to drop 18 stone. I'm going to be a supermodel. You know, that sort of mentality is what's pervading consumer and public thought. So maybe we need to blow that up in order to get people to focus their governments on what needs to be done, which is the basics, remedies, therapeutics, protecting our healthcare systems and allowing people to get to their healthcare they need on their day-to-day and stop pausing it all because of COVID. And maybe we need to interrupt what human beings have done for 700 years around pandemics and go, we need to play this one differently. Here is the reality. It's here forever. It's going to go round and round and round and round and round. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. And if the WHO come out with that line, that'd be quite dramatic, because it stopped people thinking there's a shining light at the end of the tunnel and the new normal will be back to partying and everything we did before. So I just think that is it time we got reality check and actually focus people where they need to focus? Because I can see, I was so angry in yesterday's Chamber of Commerce meeting that every industry in Canada is being focused on the recovery and a notion of post-COVID. And what you're saying is that is not a reality. Therefore, the economics of Canada and probably most countries are not gearing up for new reality. And maybe we need to focus them on that direction.
So thanks, Scott. I don't think it's useful for me to comment on what you've just said. I'd just like to leave it hanging there. And perhaps during the discussion, we will have a few other comments on, what the latest epidemiology and what we know about the variants means for the messaging. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for stressing it and doing it in such a personal way. I'd like to say that these are events where we do respect people's privacy as much as possible, but I've also learned that we can't stop people recording, so we need to all bear that in mind. By the way, we record these, and but we'll need to check with you that you're okay if we make the recording available, or whether you want it edited.
Do you know what, David?
Yes,
there are plenty of people in the world giving more to this cause than me.
okay.
Play what you want. And if I
Okay.
have a certain government minister knock on my door going saying, why are you making that public? I'll say, well, you either take me on, or I'm going to make more public what has actually happened. Your choice. I'm quite good at PR. Let's take it on.
Quite good at PR. There you go. Here's the guy who is the convener of all the PR industries, as I understand, in his particular part of the world. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely, Scott. Some of you who've got your videos on, I don't know whether you want to speak, but please, the easiest way is just drop a note in the chat if you want to speak. Then we're less likely to call on you when you're not quite ready to do so. Gawaha is saying that in Canada or across the country, the second dose is being given 4 months after the first. What is the WHO position on this? WHO's emergency use licensing for vaccines has been based on what the manufacturers did when they provided the information from their phase 3 trials. However, the UK took the interesting step of saying, at least for their vaccination, they were going to increase the interval between doses. And in the UK, there's been some pretty good evidence that a wider dose interval between 1 and 2 does not actually undermine the protective efficacy after the second dose. It seems like a 3-month interval is actually associated with good immunity. It's come from the UK. It's not been reflected in global guidance, but I just want to answer to Gawaha, there's no suggestion that I've got that a longer interval between vaccine doses diminishes the protective efficacy after the second dose. That's the important point I wanted to add. Annie and Joe, says Catherine, have both made interesting points on needing internet and other infrastructure to continue business and education. How will this impact on already existing equity gaps? Huge, huge point. I was talking to a business leader just a few days ago, and he said to me, after I'd given my opening remarks, he said, do you mean that we're going to have to go on possibly working from home for the foreseeable future? Do you mean that we're going to have to go on living lives where we're not able to congregate in the way that we're used to? And I said, well, quite possibly, yes, at least in situations where there's a lot of virus around. And so my friend then said to me, gosh, that's going to mean an absolute need to invest in internet access for all, because otherwise it's just grossly unfair. And I think this is a really important point. I'm very, very glad that both Annie and Joe have made that point. And I think we need to hold on to it. Unless we recognize that everything about COVID, whether it's the disease itself or the response to the disease, runs the risk of increasing gaps between rich and poor, haves and have-nots. Unless we recognize that and actually positively work in all our actions to deal with the potential for greater inequities, it's almost inevitable that COVID is going to increase the gaps. And we've got so much evidence that that is already happening. In other pieces of work that I do, I'm talking a lot with governments about things like how much fiscal space they have. And I'm hearing time and time again, poor countries are telling me we can't afford strong control measures, including lockdowns and movement restrictions, because we just can't pay people to compensate them for earnings lost. So there's a really difficult situation for poorer countries. where they basically are just not able to deal with the inequities that they know are happening. And if you could hold that, that would be quite useful. I don't have magic solutions, but I do know that those who are studying these things are saying, of course, this means we've got to get more money available to the IMF in order to be able to support countries that have got really embarrassing situations on their balance of payments. I just wondered whether, Vicky, you would like us to give us your views on what's happening, and how are you and Nazim continuing to try to maintain a positive spin on things? How has the recording gone of your latest song? Are Nazim's anthems getting picked up in the way that we've always hoped they will?
Well, hot off the press, I've just put it in the chat, is his latest Afro rock and roll feel-good tune, is what we've called it. And it's about really changing the conversation about focusing on people as the solution, and really recognising those COVID rockers and rollers, the people who are keeping things going, and trying to make it cool to try and to keep this virus at bay, doing the things we know we should be doing, because so much of the media is about the people who are violating the rules and so on. So that's just been released. We are going to be making a video of that, so I'll be working with Twee to help do perhaps a call out of, because we'll be looking for images of those COVID heroes, those rollers. Yeah, internet's been a real problem actually. Yeah, certainly in Gambia they've had huge problems, and that's been part of our delay. So I thought it was quite interesting, that point about people being able to work. Yeah, for Nazim, that's a problem, because he's had quite a lot of these live Zoom performances, and at the moment the internet has been really unstable there. So we've had quite a lot of problems even getting this recording done because of power supplies as well. So again, just showing the inequities there. He's also just been shortlisted. He got through to the semi-finals of the international songwriting competition with COVID ready. So out of 26,000 applications. So that's very exciting. It's a bit sad though, because when we put the song in, I was wondering, COVID might be gone by then. Little did we know. Yeah. So still highly relevant. So that's good news. So we're here next month, whether he's got through to the finals or not with that. So there's some nice, good feel good news anyway. And listen to the song and have a dance this weekend. And we'll be in contact about the video soon.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Vicky. And gosh, even through to the semi-finals with COVID ready is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, isn't that great news?
It is so good, so good. Oh, it makes me feel absolutely special. What an amazing guy.
Yeah.
Would you like to just come in? I'm seeing you shine with the most wonderful backdrop behind you. I don't know where it is, but just give us your news. You've been really, really interesting on what's happening back home. Over to you, sir. I can't unmute you from here. So
okay, now I'm good now.
Yeah, perfect.
Phones are ringing all the time, so I muted. So basically, I wanted to give an update about the Israeli vaccine, which is being developed. I sent you the document from the company itself, from the institute, but I'll give a short. So they're finishing phase 2 now, and they'll advertise it by end of March, early April. And then phase 3 will start in April in 2 different continents and about 35,000 people. And it looks like they bought in something that will deal with variants, and this will be added to the vaccine. They bought it from somebody else. That's not one developed here, but it was bought in. And the reason I'm connected, because the company will do the phase 3. It's a private company that they are going later to do the distribution as a deal against the testing. And one of the things I talked with them, and that's what actually I wanted to speak here about, is I suggested for Africa to manufacture in Africa. They can send a batch and do it there, and they're very open to that. I don't remember the country. I think it's Senegal or somewhere where they did the Ebola vaccine. So we'll need the contact to this company, and we'll connect between them so they can start setting up whatever they need to do it there. And I think that's the best way to go. Today, as you know, Italy stopped the delivery to Australia, and we don't want this to happen to Africa, because if it's coming to money or whatever, they will not be able to compete, and it's not right to do it. That's it. So the vaccine here, it's at the moment there are two other issues they're trying to solve according to the experience we brought in, not only me, of course, is temperature for Africa. They'll try to make it that they can transfer it in a not so low temperature. And the second thing, they'll try to do the one shot idea as well, to get it that one shot, and that will be effective. So I'll keep updating as much as I know. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's a huge interest now in trying to find ways to enable manufacturers in poorer countries to be able to access technology, and particularly technology, as Chaim has just said, for vaccines to be kept at fridge temperature rather than in deep freezes or even colder. And secondly, to have the capacity to be creating decent immunity with one shot, and also to be able to deal with the major variants that are coming along, particularly in the spike protein of the coronavirus. One of the things that Tedros was telling me that's going on right now in the World Trade Organization is a pretty massive dispute, because there's a big group of countries to get backed by a number of major NGOs trying to encourage what's called a patent pool, which is the release of intellectual property attached to many of these vaccines, so that they can be manufactured by licensed producers in poor countries. So therefore increasing the supply and also reducing this bottleneck that we've got at the moment. Unfortunately, they're stuck. There's a small group of countries that are resisting the creation of a patent pool, and that in turn is leading to huge frustration among the poorer countries who feel that they've got the capacity to produce vaccines, and they just want to be allowed to do so. So thank you, Chaim, for telling us that one of the companies that you're working with is ready to make the transfer. I think it's extremely good news, and we will stay in touch on this. I have to be obviously quite careful. I don't have any locus standing in this business, but I can certainly make sure that the people involved know that this is what you're trying to do. Joe Nichols, can I call on you? You've turned your video off, which makes me always a bit embarrassed, but you did send me a text recently saying that you've been looking at the situation in Somalia, and it really is quite complex, talking with people in the government and others who are involved. Would you like to give us a little snippet?
Yeah, sure. There's quite a lot of background noise, so sorry for that. But essentially, I mean, as you would expect, the government in Somalia doesn't have huge amounts of resources, and it's very challenging to even be responding to COVID, and also to consider how to roll out the COVAX. I mean, at the moment, there's an increasing number of cases. We're probably getting more numbers for the urban centres where there's more testing happening. But even there's been quite an increase in the positivity rate, has gone up quite a lot. Sorry about that. And they've run out of things like oxygen in some of the major hospitals, partly because the oxygen plants are very old and cannot produce oxygen at the necessary levels. And alongside that, we're looking at how the COVAX rollout will happen. The first tranche of the vaccines that will arrive should be about 300,000, probably even tomorrow. And one of the questions I think that people have is, do you do 300,000 people once and hope that another batch arrives quite quickly and you can do those same 300,000 people a second time? Or do you do the 150,000 people now and hope that you can get them again before the vaccine expires? And the rollout, I think, is quite complicated because each vial does 10 people or 10 doses. So then if you can only do 5 people in a certain location, you would waste the rest. So you need to also apportion it in a way that means you minimize wastage, which in itself can have political connotations and can be quite complicated. So I think there's a lot going on, and the capacity to deal with it is obviously limited, and everybody I think is trying individually their best, but it's very challenging.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, just imagining, having spent a bit of time in Mogadishu and imagining some of the challenges that you're talking about actually being dealt with in a country that's got very limited capacity in the health services, makes you realize just real chapeau to those who are making the effort. I see 2 minutes to go. I would like Magin, who seems to have good internet today in Gaborone, to just tell us a little bit about her experiences there. There have been some really tricky issues in your part of Africa that I've heard about, and it'd be nice to hear from you what it feels like. Magin, you have the floor.
I have to unmute. In Botswana, cases are rising, and we seem to be moving on to internet and doing everything online because we are not going to close. We operate as normal and try to work from home as much as possible because we have so many informal traders. But in Zim, they are receiving a vaccine called Verocell from Sinopharm. So I wanted to find out whether that vaccine is indeed 86% effective. You have already answered the other part on intervals because they are giving an interval of 28 days. So you said that's okay. The interval doesn't really matter. But then I haven't heard much of the vaccine. So I wanted to find out what's your take on that vaccine?
So this vaccine is one of several that are still finalizing some of their clinical trials and have not yet received the full emergency use license from the World Health Organization. But that doesn't prevent individual governments from reviewing the data on the vaccine and deciding whether or not, on the basis of what they've seen, it's okay for it to be licensed for use within their own countries. And that's what's happening. And certainly there's a lot of good news about this particular vaccine, and the 28-day interval seems to be correct. So thanks for that update. And I've heard from other colleagues that that particular vaccine is being used in Zimbabwe. Magan, it's good to see you. I'm glad that, that your internet is working, but I can agree with everybody that going to internet does make life very difficult for those people who just can't afford to get connected all the time. And we've got to look out for that. And I'm sure the authorities are doing so. Magan, thank you for joining us. We see you as one of our most important colleagues. You come quite regularly. And on behalf of all of us, we'd like to send you all our best wishes, and please stay in touch, especially through these difficult times when you've got some quite nasty spikes in your part of the world. Really best wishes to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Jean-Luc Poncelet, I wanted to squeeze a second or two before the end. My colleagues have pointed out to me that you've been writing an interesting remark in the chat, which I can't look at, but your wisdom is always there, and I'd like us to tap into it now. And if Henk is still on, I know, yeah, Henk, if you could come in quickly behind Jean-Luc as two of my favorite mentors, could you tell us what you're picking up?
Yeah, thank you, David. I will not speak too much, but just making echo to Scott's comment and some others, in the chat room. I think there's what strikes me, being based in the US, but also following Europe, but working more specifically for fragile state, is that it remains still denominated as a health crisis. And we're discussing among health people, health professionals. And I was wondering whether it will not be time for, WHO to push a bit more for having a more comprehensive, take on that one. The comments of Scott, the Chamber of Commerce, you can find it everywhere. It's like, oh, it's a health issue. They are the one to solve, and we complain about it. So I think it's really time to have a multi-sectoral approach. And I don't know, I'm coming from the disaster management side, and I think involving more national disaster committee could help WHO in the fight going forward. So I would, love to exchange a bit more with you, and maybe send a little article on that one to see how can we do that Not that the US is much more interested in having a more comprehensive support to that. I think we can harness that one both in the UN and the US and in Europe. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. I think everyone here would say here, and we need to continue to try to navigate in that direction. To Henk Bekkerdam, please.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thanks also for everybody else for the comments. And I think just a reflection, but I do realize my reflection becomes far much more Europe since I've been now almost 1 year back. But nevertheless, the discussion about the zero COVID we had for some times, and one time I felt what was very important to read is, because you already say you need to learn to live with the virus, perhaps we talk about zero tolerance for the virus. So that we don't talk about zero COVID, but that we aim for, that we still say, look, we need to fight this one and we need to be jointly together. The other part which is important now, and I think it's all over the world, and definitely in Europe you feel it, the perspective. Where are we going? And I would like also to mention all the things you've been saying. We need to see now from where the vaccinations are taking place, we see very positive results. In the Netherlands now, where the 85+ are now being vaccinated, and the care homes, it goes drastically down, etc. And I think we need to have a positivity as well that things are coming. And as well, where possible, where testing can help to open up more safely and more responsible, that's one of the other tools that we should not forget. And David, you know, one thing I always talk about, and that's very close to what Scott's heart lies, we need to now invest more in public health. The basic things should be right. The testing, the tracing, the isolation, but also the quarantine, because we deal with a virus that can spread by people who don't have the symptoms. So we need to be on top of those.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Henk. John Atkinson, please, and then Tweet.
So my closing reflection, listening to the conversation, Scott's input, Jean-Luc's build on it, others build on it, goes back to somewhere where we were some time back. And we used the phrase, more people doing more of the right things for more of the time because they choose to. And they'll choose to because they see the information that's necessary to make sense of what they're seeing around them in their own world and just do the right things. And we do see people change. We are seeing much more mask wearing in Europe than we imagined would be possible perhaps in March, April, and so on and so on. So we need to keep a constant story that tells the truth as to what's happening around the world, what we're seeing in ways that people can easily take on board and make sense of, so they make more choices about doing the right things at the right times.
Thank you very much, John. Constant truth. Couldn't agree with you more. Kat, just to say thank you to Catherine for everything. Particularly, it was Catherine who structured the conversation today. She produced the briefing. Beautiful. Hello to DJ Forza. Lovely to see you here, and welcome back to NK SETI. Twee, thank you.
Thank you, David. So, as I promised, let's have a look at the beautiful illustration drawn by Josh. How did it go, Josh? Did you achieve what you were looking for?
I'm still beavering away over here, but I'm just working on this hotspot planet, Earth. If you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that's the Earth is a little bit pox-ridden. It's feeling a bit poxy, and suggestions for its speech bubble are welcome, but it's going to be along the lines of something like, you know, less travel, less hotspots, something like that, and more care in the community health.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Josh. That illustration, I'll share that on our LinkedIn community chat. If you've not joined that group yet, please do send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'd be very happy to add you there. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. It'll be 8 a.m. Central European time. And of course, ideas for future trivia. If you would like to write a blog with us about your reflections following these briefings, that's also very welcome too. So back to you, David, for the final goodbyes and smiles.
Okay, everybody, if you find this helpful, obviously, please join the WhatsApp group or LinkedIn group, sorry, and just tell us if there are things that you'd like changed. Let us know. I appreciate that Our timings are not always convenient for you in some parts of the world. That's why we alternate. But we want to stay in touch. Very, very grateful to you all for sparing the time to join. We really appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of the day and a good weekend. With that, we say bye-bye. Bye.